you can easily get the impression, not just from Senator Coons, but other senators, that somehow you, Judge Kavanaugh, are out of the mainstream some way. So I looked at your record in the D.C. Circuit and have found that judges have agreed with you and your rulings in an overwhelming majority of matters across the board. 94% of the matters Judge Kavanaugh heard were decided unanimously. In 97% of the matters Judge Kavanaugh heard, he voted with the majority. Judge Kavanaugh issued dissenting opinions in only 2 7/10% of the matters that you heard. I would also like to clarify what the Presidential Records Act requires. Our documents process has fully complied with the Presidential Records Act. Under the federal statute, President Bush has the right to request his own administration records. He also has the authority to review his records before the Senate receives them. Indeed, the archives may not produce them to the committee without giving President Bush and his statutory representatives an opportunity to review first. This is what President Bush has done, and the National Archives does not have the authority to second-guess President Bush's decision to release records to us. The National Archives was not cut out of the process. As President Bush's representative informed the committee, quote, because we have sought, received, and followed NARA, that means the archivist's views on any documents withheld as personal documents, the resulting productions of documents to the committee is essentially the same as if the archivist had conducted its review first and then sought our views and the current administration views as required by law. End of quote. Senator Flake.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Congratulations, Judge Kavanaugh. Congratulations to your family as well. Let me just say a few things about the issue that has been discussed here a lot today, the issue of documents and document production. The standard historically that we use to looking at nominees is what is relevant and probative. I would suggest that we certainly get that from the 12 years you've served on the circuit court, on the D.C. Circuit Court, that considers, when you look at the docket, items that, more than any other circuit court, that the Supreme Court would be perhaps called to rule on. In the past, senators on this panel have argued on both sides of the aisle that confirming a judge, the best we can look at is his or her judicial record. You have that record, and it's a long one, over 300 opinions, and I would suggest that that's where we need to start. A lot of the other records that have been discussed are mainly duplicative, administrative documents. Many do not meet the standard of relevant or probative. They may not demonstrate the type of justice that you will be. Senator Sass talked about what we are called to do here, is to look at your temperament and your judgment and your character. And I think you can see a lot of that by the type of life you've lived outside of the courtroom. When we met in my office, I was impressed, obviously, with your respect for the law and quick intellect, but also struck by kindness and decency. I found out that we share deep love of sports. We both played football back in the day. I'm sure you're looking forward to this weekend, not just when these hearings are concluded, but when the Redskins and Cardinals play on Sunday. I learned that you've run the Boston Marathon twice. I wonder if the ABA took that into account when they gave you a favorable rating. I'm not sure what that says about your soundness of mind, myself. But in all seriousness, training for a marathon, completing 2 marathons like this is a huge accomplishment. It demonstrates not just your competitive spirit, but a strong sense of purpose and commitment, and says something about your temperament and character. Of course, you have no greater commitment than to your family, your wife Ashley, and your 2 daughters. I know that you beamed with pride when talking about them, and talking about, as has been mentioned earlier, coaching your daughter's elementary school basketball teams. I have a letter for the record written by a group of parents whose girls play for basketball teams that Judge Kavanaugh coaches. And with Mr. Chairman, without objection, I'd like to enter that letter into the record.
So ordered.
The team's parents note that Judge Kavanaugh has been a devoted coach and a mentor to their daughters. As these parents note, Coach K, and that's you, not the Duke famous one, stresses the importance of playing as a team and has provided their girls the opportunity to learn about teamwork, honesty, integrity, humility, respect, discipline, hard work, and competitiveness. Again, we're going back to temperament and character. Judge Kavanaugh's dedication and commitment as a volunteer basketball coach, I think, demonstrates and says a good deal about that character. And congratulations to you and the Blessed Sacrament Bulldogs for winning the city championship this past year. I know you must be proud of your team. Now, aside from running marathons, winning basketball championships, you've spent, as I mentioned, the last 12 years as a federal appeals court judge on the D.C. Circuit. You have earned a reputation among legal commentators and colleagues on both sides of the aisle of a solid, careful judge, a thorough and clear writer, and someone who promotes collegiality on the court, working with people across ideological lines. I have also a New York Times article for the record written by Professor Akhil Amar, a self-professed liberal who describes Judge Kavanaugh as one who appreciates the craft of judging with seriousness and commands wide and deep respect among scholars, lawyers, and jurists across the political spectrum. Mr. Chairman, I'd like to submit that for the record as well. As I mentioned, Judge Kavanaugh has amassed an astonishingly distinguished and extensive record, writing more than 300 opinions, joining his colleagues in issuing thousands of additional cases. And that is where we need to look first when we're looking at how you will judge on the Supreme Court. Now, I know, and it has been brought up today, that a lot of the concern on the other side of the aisle stems from the concern of an administration that doesn't seem to understand and appreciate separation of powers and the rule of law. I have that concern as well. If you just look at what was said just yesterday by the president, I think it's very concerning. He said in a tweet, 2 long-running Obama-era investigations of 2 very popular Republican congressmen were brought to a well-publicized charge just ahead of the midterms by the Jeff Sessions Justice Department, he calls it. 2 easy wins now in doubt because there is not enough time. Good job, Jeff. That is why a lot of people are concerned about this administration and why they want to ensure that our institutions hold. Thus far they have, gratefully. Jeff Sessions has resisted pressure from the president to punish his enemies and relieve pressure on his friends. And many of the questions that you will get on the other side of the aisle and from me will be how you view that relationship, where you believe the Article 1 powers and Article 2 powers of the administration begin. So I expect to have a number of questions on that subject. I, again, appreciate your willingness to put yourself through this process, and I look forward to the hearing moving ahead in the next week. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Okay. Senator Blumenthal.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, for your conducting these hearings as fairly and patiently as you have, and I am going to be remarking further on what procedurally I think is appropriate here, but I want to begin by thanking Judge Kavanaugh and your family for your commitment to public service. I want to thank the many, many Americans who are paying attention to this hearing, not only in this room, but also across the country. I want to thank them for their interest and indeed their passion. That is what sustains democracy, that commitment to ordinary, everyday Americans participating and engaging in this process. There is a T-shirt worn by a number of folks walking around this building that says, "I am what's at stake." This vote and this proceeding could not be more consequential in light of what is at stake. Whether women can decide when they want to have children and become pregnant, whether the people of America can decide whom they would like to marry, whether we drink clean water and breathe clean air, whether consumers are protected against defective product and financial abuses, and whether we have a real system of checks and balances, or alternatively, an imperial presidency. I will not cast a vote more important than this one, and I suspect few of my colleagues will as well. And what's at stake is indeed also the rule of law. My colleague, Senator Flake, quoted the president's tweet yesterday. I'm going to repeat it. 2 long-running Obama-era investigations of 2 very popular Republican congressmen were brought to a well-publicized charge just ahead of the midterms by the Jeff Sessions Justice Department. 2 easy wins, now in doubt because there is not enough time. Good job, Jeff. I've had my disagreements with this Department of Justice. I want to note for the record that at least one high-ranking member of the Department of Justice was in this room. I want to urge the Department of Justice to stand strong and hold fast against this onslaught, which threatens the basic principles of our democracy. And I want to join my colleague, Senator Sass, in his hope that you, Judge Kavanaugh, would condemn this attack on the rule of law and our judiciary. Because at the end of this dark era, when the history of this time is written, I believe that the heroes will be our independent judiciary and our free press. You are nominated by that very president who has launched this attack on our Department of Justice, on the rule of law, on law enforcement, like the FBI, law enforcement at every level, whose integrity he has questioned. And your responses to our questions will be highly enlightening about whether you join us in defending the judiciary and the rule of law. That very president has nominated you in this unprecedented time. Unprecedented because he is an unindicted co-conspirator who has nominated a potential justice who will cast the swing vote on issues relating to his possible criminal culpability. In fact, whether he is required to obey a subpoena to appear before a grand jury, whether he is required to testify in a prosecution of his friends or associates or other officials in his administration, and whether, in fact, he is required to stand trial.